The journey to the unknown. I remember the day clearly, even though it feels like a lifetime ago. I was sitting on the old porch of our house, staring out at the vast fields that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of stillness that made you feel like nothing in the world could ever change. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't stay there forever. My heart had always yearned for something more, something beyond the peaceful life that my family had carved out for us. My father was a farmer, and so was his father before him. Our family had lived on this land for generations, planting and harvesting, relying on the rhythm of the seasons to provide for us. There was a comfort in that predictability, in knowing that after a long winter, spring would come again and the crops would grow. But for me, it wasn't enough. I longed for adventure, for the kind of life I had only read about in books or heard in the stories of travelers who occasionally passed through our small town. From the time I was young, I dreamed of faraway places, mountain ranges with snow-capped peaks, dense jungles teeming with wildlife, and bustling cities where life moved faster than I could imagine. My family, especially my father, never understood my dreams. They saw the world beyond our fields as dangerous, unpredictable, and full of risks. My father would often tell me that adventure was just another word for trouble, and that the safest place for me was right there at home, where life was simple and secure. But my heart disagreed. As I grew older, the tension between my desires and my family's wishes became harder to ignore. I tried to be the son they wanted me to be, working alongside my father in the fields, learning the trade of farming, and taking care of the land. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that my destiny lay elsewhere. It wasn't that I didn't love my family or the life they had built. It was just that I felt like there was a whole world out there waiting for me, and I didn't want to spend my entire life wondering what could have been. The turning point came when a traveler named Elias came through town. He was unlike anyone I had ever met. Tall, with weathered skin from years spent under the sun, and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the world. He had traveled across continents, seen wonders I could only imagine, and had stories that could make even the most skeptical person believe in the magic of the unknown. He spoke of distant lands where the air smelled of spices, of rivers that glittered under the moonlight, and of cities that never slept. I listened to his stories with rapt attention, feeling a sense of excitement building inside me that I hadn't felt in years. When he spoke of the mountains, I could almost see them rising in the distance, their peaks piercing the clouds. When he described the endless deserts, I could feel the hot wind against my skin. It was as if he had unlocked something inside me, a deep, primal urge to explore, to leave behind the safety of home and venture into the unknown. After Elias left, I couldn't stop thinking about his stories. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Could I really leave everything behind and go on an adventure of my own? The thought both thrilled and terrified me. I knew that if I left, there would be no turning back. My family would be heartbroken, and I would be walking into a world full of dangers and uncertainties. But at the same time, I knew that if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what I had missed. The day I made my decision was both the hardest and the easiest day of my life. I woke up before dawn, packed a small bag with the essentials, some food, a few changes of clothes, and a map that Elias had given me as a parting gift. I didn't say goodbye to my family. I knew that if I did, I might lose the courage to leave. Instead, I left a note on the kitchen table, explaining that I had to follow my heart, and that I hoped they would understand someday. As I walked down the dirt road that led away from our house, I felt a mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course. Leaving the only life I had ever known wasn't easy. But there was also a sense of exhilaration, a feeling of freedom that I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I was in control of my own destiny. The world was wide open, and I could go wherever I wanted. The first few days of my journey were both exhilarating and exhausting. I had never walked such long distances before, and my feet ached from the constant strain. The nights were cold, and I often found myself missing the warmth of home. But with every step, I felt like I was getting closer to something, closer to the adventure I had always dreamed of. The landscapes changed as I moved further from the farm. The flat fields gave way to rolling hills, and soon the mountains that Elias had spoken of loomed in the distance. It was on the 5th day of my journey that I encountered my first real challenge. I had been following a narrow path through the hills when I heard a low growl coming from the trees ahead. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly I reached for the small knife I had brought with me. More of a tool than a weapon, but it was the only thing I had. As I scanned the trees, I saw movement, a flash of fur and the glint of yellow eyes in the shadows. A wolf. I had never encountered a wolf before, but I knew enough to realize that I was in serious danger. The wolf was larger than I had imagined, its fur matted, and its eyes locked on me with a predatory intensity. I knew that running was not an option. Wolves were fast, and I would never be able to outrun it. I had to think quickly. Without taking my eyes off the wolf, I slowly backed away, trying to make myself seem as non-threatening as possible. My heart was racing, and my mind was a whirlwind of panic and fear. But I knew that if I showed weakness, the wolf would attack. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, praying that the wolf would lose interest and leave me alone. For a moment it seemed to work. The wolf hesitated, its growl fading slightly as it watched me. I took another step back, then another. But just as I thought I might be safe, the wolf lunged. Instinct took over. I raised my knife and swung wildly, hoping to scare the wolf away. The blade grazed its side and the wolf yelped in pain, but it didn't stop. It leaped at me again, its teeth bared and its claws outstretched. I braced myself for impact, knowing that I was no match for the beast. But just as the wolf was about to reach me, something incredible happened. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared, crashing through the trees with a shout. The wolf stopped mid-lunge, startled by the sudden commotion. The figure, a man, raised a long staff and swung it at the wolf, driving it back into the trees. The wolf snarled, but after a moment of hesitation, it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood there, stunned and breathing heavily as the man turned to me. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. His clothes were worn and covered in dirt, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. I nodded, still too shaken to speak. "That was a close one," he said, lowering his staff. "You shouldn't be wandering these hills alone. It's dangerous out here." "I didn't know," I stammered. "Thank you for saving me." The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're lucky I was nearby. Those wolves can be vicious." For the next few minutes, I caught my breath and tried to calm my racing heart. The man introduced himself as Rowan, a traveler like myself, though he had been on the road for much longer. He told me that he had been following the same path when he heard the commotion and decided to investigate. We walked together for a while, and I was grateful for the company. Rowan was full of stories about his travels, and I listened eagerly, soaking up every detail. He had seen the mountains and deserts that I had only dreamed of, and his tales of adventure made me even more excited about what lay ahead. But Rowan also had a word of caution for me. "The world is full of beauty and wonder," he said, "but it's also full of danger. You have to be careful. Not everyone you meet will be friendly, and not every situation will end as well as this one." I nodded, taking his words to heart. I knew that my journey would be difficult, but I was determined to see it through. Over the next few weeks, I continued my journey with renewed purpose. The landscapes grew more rugged as I ventured deeper into the mountains, and the air grew thinner and colder. But with every step, I felt like I was getting closer to something. Closer to the adventure I had always dreamed of. I encountered more challenges along the way. Treacherous paths, wild animals, and even a band of thieves who tried to steal my belongings. But with each challenge, I grew stronger, more confident in my abilities. And through it all, I never lost sight of my goal: to explore the world and find my place in it. One of the most memorable moments of my journey came when I reached the peak of the highest mountain I had ever seen. It had taken me days to climb, and there were moments when I thought I wouldn't make it. The wind was fierce, and the cold bit through my clothes, but I pushed on, determined to reach the top. When I finally stood at the summit, I was overwhelmed by the view that stretched out before me. The world below seemed so small, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I had conquered the mountain, and in doing so, I had proven to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. But even as I stood there, basking in the glory of my achievement, I knew that this was just the beginning of my adventure. There were still so many places to see, so many things to learn. As I stood at the summit, the crisp mountain air filled my lungs, and a wave of exhilaration washed over me. The journey to reach this point had been grueling, but the view that stretched out in front of me made every step worth it. I could see the valleys below, their rivers winding like silver threads through the landscape. Far in the distance, more mountains rose like giants, their peaks lost in the clouds. But even though I had reached this incredible height, I knew that my adventure was far from over. The world was vast, and there were so many places I had yet to explore. Standing there, I felt both humbled and inspired. Humbled by the sheer scale of the world around me, and inspired by the knowledge that there were still countless wonders waiting to be discovered. As I made my way back down the mountain, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come since leaving home. In the beginning, I had been uncertain, hesitant, and filled with doubts. But now, after weeks on the road, I felt like a different person. I had faced dangers, overcome challenges, and grown stronger because of them. And I knew that I would continue to grow with each new experience. When I reached the base of the mountain, I found myself at a small village nestled in the valley. The people there were friendly, offering me food and shelter for the night. As we sat around the fire, I shared some of my stories with them, and in return they told me about their lives in the mountains. How they survived the harsh winters, how they tended to their flocks, and how they had passed down their traditions from generation to generation. It was a quiet, simple life, and as I listened to their stories, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For a moment, I wondered if this was the kind of life I was meant to live. One rooted in the land, close to nature, and far from the noise and chaos of the outside world. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew that I wasn't ready to settle down. Not yet. There was still so much I wanted to see, so much I wanted to experience. The next morning, I set out once again, this time heading toward the coast. I had heard stories of a great ocean that lay beyond the mountains, and I was eager to see it for myself. The journey took me through forests and across rivers, and with each passing day, I felt the air grow warmer and more humid. The trees grew taller and denser, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. As I traveled, I encountered more travelers like myself, some on foot, others on horseback, and a few with carts filled with goods to trade. We would exchange stories and share meals around campfires, and I found comfort in the knowledge that I wasn't alone on this journey. Each person I met had their own reasons for being on the road, their own dreams and aspirations. Some were seeking fortune, others were looking for adventure, and a few, like me, were simply searching for something they couldn't quite define. One evening, as I was setting up camp by a river, a young woman approached me. She was dressed in simple clothes, with a pack slung over her shoulder and a determined look in her eyes. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, nodding toward the fire I had just started. "Not at all," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. Her name was Elena, and like me, she was on a journey to explore the world. As we talked, I learned that she had left her home months ago, seeking adventure and the chance to prove herself. She was strong and independent, but there was also a vulnerability in her eyes that told me she, too, had faced her share of challenges on the road. We spent the evening sharing stories of our travels, and by the time the fire had burned down to embers, I felt like I had made a true friend. The next morning, we decided to continue our journey together. It was the first time since leaving home that I had traveled with someone for more than a day, and I quickly discovered that having a companion made the road feel less lonely. Together, Elena and I made our way toward the coast. The days passed quickly as we shared the burdens of travel, splitting the load, helping each other navigate difficult terrain, and watching each other's backs. We laughed, we argued, and we faced dangers together. But through it all, we grew closer. It was on the 15th day of our journey that we finally caught sight of the ocean. We had been walking through a dense forest, the sound of the waves growing louder with each step, when suddenly the trees parted, and there it was, the vast, endless expanse of water stretching out to the horizon. The sight took my breath away. I had never seen anything so immense, so powerful, and so beautiful. Elena and I stood there in silence for a long time, just taking it all in. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and the waves crashed against the shore with a steady, rhythmic sound. It felt like we had reached the edge of the world. "This is it," Elena said softly, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we've been searching for." I nodded, unable to find the words to express what I was feeling. In that moment, I realized that the ocean was more than just a destination. It was a symbol of everything we had been through, all the challenges we had faced, and all the dreams we had carried with us. It was a reminder that the world was vast and full of possibilities, and that we were just two small travelers making our way through it. We camped on the beach that night, the sound of the waves lulling us to sleep. In the morning, we waded into the water, feeling the cool ocean breeze on our faces. It was a moment of triumph, but also of reflection. We had come so far, but the journey was far from over. As we sat on the shore, watching the waves roll in, Elena turned to me. "What's next for you?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. There were still so many places I wanted to see, so many adventures waiting for me. But I also knew that the journey wasn't just about the destinations. It was about the experiences along the way, the people I met, and the lessons I learned. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But I think that's the beauty of it. The journey never really ends, does it?" Elena smiled. "No, it doesn't." And with that, we packed up our things and set off once again, the ocean at our backs and the road stretching out before us. The world was full of possibilities, and I was ready to face whatever came next. As Elena and I continued our journey, we encountered new challenges and made new discoveries. We traveled through bustling cities where the streets were alive with the sounds of merchants haggling and children playing. We climbed more mountains, crossed rivers, and explored ancient ruins that told the stories of civilizations long gone. At every turn, there was something new to learn, something that deepened my understanding of the world and of myself. I realized that the journey wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about growing, about becoming more than I had been before. And as the months passed, I found myself thinking more and more about home. It wasn't that I wanted to return to the life I had left behind. I still craved adventure, still wanted to explore the world. But I also knew that my family was a part of me, and that no matter how far I traveled, a piece of my heart would always belong to the farm where I had grown up. One day, as Elena and I were sitting by a campfire, I told her about my family, about my father, who had never understood my desire to leave, and about the quiet life I had once thought was too small for me. As I spoke, I realized that I had changed in ways I hadn't even noticed. The boy who had left home was different from the man sitting by the fire. Elena listened quietly, her eyes reflecting the flames of the fire. "You miss them, don't you?" she asked. I nodded. "I do. I didn't think I would, but I do." She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. That's the thing about journeys. They show us where we've been, but they also show us where we belong. Her words stayed with me as we continued our travels. I wasn't ready to go home yet, but I knew that one day I would. And when I did, I would return, not as the boy who had left in search of adventure, but as someone who had found it, and who had discovered that the greatest journey was the one that led back to the people you love. For now, though, the road stretched out before me, full of new challenges, new discoveries, and new adventures. And with Elena by my side, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. The journey was far from over.